Welcome to Macro Unit 1, Lesson 1, Section 1, the circular flow of economic activity. Almost all countries calculate a set of numbers known as the national income and product accounts. In fact, the accuracy of a country's accounts is a remarkably reliable indicator of its state of economic development. The more reliable the accounts, the more economically developed the country. In the U.S., these numbers are calculated by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, a division of the U.S. government's Department of Commerce. The national income and product accounts keep track of the spending of consumers, the sales of producers, business investment spending, government purchases, and a variety of other flows of money among different sectors of the economy. To understand the principles behind the national accounts, it helps to look at a graphic called the circular flow diagram. This is a diagram of the macroeconomy, showing the flows of money, goods and services, and factors of production through the economy, and it allows us to visualize the key concepts behind the national accounts. The underlying principle is that the flow of money into each market or sector is equal to the flow of money going out of that market or sector. The U.S. economy is a vastly complex entity with more than 100 million workers employed by millions of companies, producing millions of different goods and services. This is why we use a simple model of the macroeconomy that represents the transactions that take place by two kinds of flows around the circle. Flows of physical things, such as goods, services, labor, or raw materials, go in one direction, and flows of money that pay for those things go in the opposite direction. The simple circular flow diagram illustrates an economy that contains only two kinds of inhabitants: households and firms. Households consist of either an individual or a group of people who share their income and sell their resources to firms. They do this in exchange for income. The firms are organizations that hire resources of production from households in order to produce goods and services that they then sell back to households. They do this in exchange for revenue, which is the results of their sales. These exchanges of money for resources and products take place in two markets: the product market, in which households buy goods and services from firms, and the factor market, where firms buy the resources that they need to produce those goods and services. The most common resource purchased is labor, and wages households earn for their labor is the largest source of income for households. The expanded circular flow diagram includes extra elements that are ignored in the simple diagram. The basics are still the same. Households and firms still exchange their resources and products in the two markets. But now, firms are also engaged in commerce with the rest of the world, selling goods overseas as imports. Households are also putting their unspent income into savings in the financial markets. The financial markets invest that income into foreign and domestic stocks that allow companies to expand. The rest of the world is also selling us their goods in the form of exports, and those foreign individuals are also investing in our firms through the financial markets once again. This is also the place where we add in the government. The government pulls revenue from both households and firms in the form of taxes, and it pulls revenue from the financial markets in a process called government borrowing. The government will use this revenue to purchase goods and services that it uses or distributes according to law. The government also gives back money to households and firms in the form of transfer payments, which are monies issued by the government for intended purposes, like purchasing food, housing, or producing socially beneficial goods, like vaccines. Let's discuss a few more terms that you will need to know for this lesson. Stocks are shares in ownership of a company, and they can be purchased both by domestic and foreign individuals and firms. Bonds are loans that both domestic and foreign individuals, firms, and even governments make to the financial market or to the government, the Treasury specifically, in exchange for interest payments and the promise of full repayment in the future. Both stocks and bonds contribute to the income of households. Government transfers are payments that the government makes to individuals without expecting a good or service in return. Examples are things like employment insurance payments and welfare payments. Disposable income is the total income households have left after paying taxes and receiving government transfers. The bulk of a household's income comes from wages, and smaller amounts come from other factor payments, such as rent on land resources and interest on investments and on capital. Private savings are the portion of household disposable income that is put into the financial markets. Those deposits are then used by the financial market as loans and investments to grow their value, and the households are paid interest in exchange for allowing financial markets to use those funds. Government spending, which is funded by tax revenue and borrowing, is used to purchase goods and services such as military equipment, textbooks, and desks for schools, and also local special services like the police force and the fire department. Exports are goods and services that are produced domestically, say in the US, but then sold to other countries, and they create a flow of funds from the rest of the world into the United States economy. Imports, on the other hand, are foreign produced goods and services that are purchased from other countries, and they create an outflow of funds from the US. When calculating net exports for an economy, exports are positive and imports are negative. Inventories are goods and raw materials that firms hold to facilitate their operations. When calculating national productivity, increases in inventories are counted as investment spending, which is when firms purchase new productive physical capital, such as machinery and buildings. You might be wondering why changes in inventories are included in investment spending. After all, a finished car isn't used to produce more cars. Changes in inventories are counted as investment spending because, like machinery, they change the ability of a firm to make future sales. Spending on additions to inventory allow firms to make more future sales, and less investment in inventories means lower future sales. Think of it like this. Right now, car companies are producing next year's line of cars, but they won't be sold on the market until next year. Starting next year, when they release their line of cars, they'll be able to sell a lot right then instead of having to wait for them to be produced. Houses are counted in inventory as well, since they produce a future stream of output, housing services for the occupants. And that's the end of section 1. See you soon.